Date with a Debut is recorded and produced on Awabakal Country, and I pay my respects to all elders past and present and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show. Welcome to Date with a Debut, a podcast about debut authors, their incredible books, and their journey to publication. If you're looking for a new author to discover or writing inspiration for your own story and you don't know where to start, this is the place to be. I'm Nick Wasiliev, host of the show, and I'm delighted to welcome another debut author in today's episode. If you enjoyed this show, jump online and give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review. It really helps the show out. If you also want to hear episodes when they drop, be sure to subscribe to Words and Nerds, or you can subscribe to Date with a Debut on Podbean to hear the latest episodes as they drop. Want to support the show more? You can also subscribe to my Patreon in the description to get early access to episodes, book reviews, recommendations, and a whole lot more. Wherever you are listening, thank you for listening to us and supporting the Australian book industry. You can also find any books mentioned in today's podcast down in the description. Today, I'm joined by Dr Anastasia Hronis, a clinical psychologist and founder of the Australian Institute for Human Wellness. She is a practicing clinician as well as a researcher and lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. But we're here today to talk about her debut non-fiction book, The Dopamine Brain, published by Penguin Random House Australia, which you can get a copy of down in the description. We will discuss some mild spoilers, so I recommend you get a copy now, or at least very soon. I started off by asking Dr. Anastasia about her interest in psychology and her reactions now that the book is out in the world. Dr. Anastasia, welcome to Date with a Debut.
Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to have you here, and we're here obviously to talk about your book, The Dopamine Brain. But first, I wanted to start off by psychoanalyzing the psychologist a little bit so much, because like reading up on you and reading into your history, reading into your past and your career rather, like it's so interesting, like chatting to a psychologist, because you specialize in addictions, if that's correct. So like alcohol, drugs, smoking, sex, gambling, pornography, why people get addicted to like the things that they do. And I just really kind of want to start with a real softball opener, which is how the heck did that happen? How did you find yourself going down that rabbit hole of career prospects? Just for my own curiosity.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. How did I get into the world of addictions? I actually fell into it. It was never really my plan when I was studying psychology to go, you know what, I really want to work in addictions. I actually applied for a research job doing some other research, and I didn't get it, but they said, can we keep your CV on file in case anything else comes up? And I said, sure. And, you know, a month later, they're like, we've got some gambling research we're doing. And I was like, gambling? All right, I guess, you know, it's a job, it's work, I'll take it. And then a similar thing happened clinically. I was working at a psychiatric hospital. I was doing like anxiety, depression, trauma programs with like first responders. And then they said, oh, look, we need someone on our drug and alcohol program. And again, I was like, ooh, okay, haven't really done too much of that. Fell into it and absolutely fell in love with the clinical side of addiction work and the research side of it as well. So I'm really lucky I had those opportunities presented to me, and I just sort of took the leap, and it turned out well.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this book, I can understand why you fell into it, because you're examining how crazy human beings think and what makes them tick in a way, shape, or form. And obviously, given your field of interest, I mean, before we dive into the book, I always like to ask a little bit about how it came together, the process. And often, you know, we have fiction books or memoirs for nonfiction, done a couple of research of kind of different types of self-help and nonfiction on the show. But you know, obviously, given your field of interest, it comes with a lot of work, education. What was it like? Obviously, this was published through Penguin. What was it kind of like actually taking Penguin on the journey with your research, so to speak? How did that sort of work? Because obviously they've got the expertise of here's how we craft a good book and a good story per se, but you also bringing the expertise of psychology and addiction to it.
Yeah, look, it was actually a really interesting introduction to book writing, because Penguin actually reached out to me with the idea for the book. So it's not entirely my brainchild. They actually, through their team that analysed trends, identified that dopamine was trending. We'd seen dopamine detoxes go through social media. And people kind of, I guess, a rising trend in the kind of self-help literature about people wanting to understand more about like the brain and the body in a more of a sort of sciencey kind of way. I think the self-help kind of wave that came before was the more sort of psychological, but now we're really seeing a lot of books published that are that have got that kind of sciencey backed information about the brain and physically how the body works to impact psychologically and our mental health. And so they identified dopamine as trending. They reached out to me and said, hey, we've got this idea for a book. Are you interested in writing it? And when I got that email, I legitimately thought it was just spam at first, like one of these fake publishers that reach out to you and then say, sure, we'll publish your book. It'll cost you 50 grand or something. So thankfully I did some digging. My editor was a real person, and we went from there. It was a fantastic process working with them.
That is amazing. Like, I think this is the first time that we've ever like had one of those situations where like a publisher had an idea for a book and approached the author. Usually it's the other way around. Whenever it's fiction or even a memoir, the author has kind of sat with this story and whatever, and then pitches it to a publisher, and it's the other way around, which is so interesting. Yes, the publishing world does in fact work like that. Sometimes, you do identify books like that and go hunting for them.
Yeah, yes. And because it was identified as being somewhat topical, it was a year from me kind of signing on with them to it being out in the world. So I wrote the manuscript in about 6 months. We did some edits back and forth, and then within a year it was out in the world, which was a wild and fast process.
True. And now, out of curiosity, I mean, obviously the book has been out in the world for a little while. It's kind of been out, it's done the rounds, had its adventures. What's, out of curiosity, how's the reaction been from readers? What are some of the reactions that you've kind of that surprised you, that you've noticed, that you've kind of picked up on? How's that reaction sort of been?
I've had some really lovely emails, messages on social media, kind of, I guess, different ways of people contacting me to tell me how they've been able to make some changes in their life, which has been really lovely. Like if they've read the book and they're like, you know what, I've decided to cut down how much alcohol I drink, or I've, followed some of the steps in your book and now I'm using my phone less to swipe on social media. It's really nice to kind of hear the ways in which people have applied the sort of techniques in the book to their specific life. So that's always been really lovely to kind of receive those messages. And one of the ladies who contacted me actually started up her own podcast, and then she had me as a guest on her podcast, and we had this kind of shared enjoyable moment there. But it's been wonderful just hearing the responses from people, whether it be they've just learned a bit more about how the brain works, or whether they've been able to make some changes for themselves.
I'd actually imagine that would actually be a really nice thing to see, that people are willing to dig into research and not, and actually find a lot of informed enjoyment out of actually learning about a new subject, which I think would be such a nice thing to hear. Because obviously, I mean, when you hear about examining the brain and psychology, obviously it's something that we're always learning more about. The human body, we don't know absolutely everything about it. So I'd imagine that people actually doing a deep dive into it would probably be quite like a, yes, people want to know, they want to be educated and informed. I love it.
Yes. And I actually, as you say that, I wonder if there'll be more and more of an appetite for those kinds of books in the future, just given how much we can consume on social media without really knowing how credible or scientific it actually is. People make all sorts of TikToks and videos these days that seem credible, but unless you go and sort of dive into the person and their background and their research and who they are and where they're getting that information from, which most of us don't necessarily have the time to do, we can be bombarded with information that isn't really scientifically correct. So I think books perhaps that are put together by people who have specialist interests or areas of knowledge, there may be more and more of an appetite for that in the future.
God, you've now poked my brain this, because now I just need to ask a follow-up question in regards to that, because like I have like a kind of a hypothesis about it. I actually think that, obviously because of the nature of the online space right now, it's very much based on like emotion, and it just feels like it's a bit of a to use the scientific term, a shit fight, just out there online. Because it just feels like the distortion of fact and fiction, and also just the bombardment of content online, can often be quite overwhelming. I have a hypothesis, and this is maybe more just my experience of being on social media, so it doesn't come from any sort of psychology background, which is why I want to ask you this question. That inevitably, if you have been on those social media platforms for long enough, or for a period, and you're not finding joy, and there is no dopamine hit necessarily, that you inevitably get tired of it. I notice I find myself, on Facebook less and less. A lot of my generation find themselves on Facebook less and less, and on those platforms less and less. Is there any truth to that? Is there any truth that maybe human beings, because we naturally are, because we have such an unusually large brain compared to other species, that we actually would inevitably seek out something that's a bit more substantive? Or is it just an addiction, or is it just comes down to we got everything that we can out of this particular addiction?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think, like, social media is so designed to keep us hooked on there for as long as possible. And so by the way that it activates those dopamine pathways in the brain, dopamine is activated through this kind of process of motivating us to seek something out. And so on the one hand, we're kind of hooked on the platforms, but on the other hand, it's really quite tiring. Like, we're actually consuming a lot of not just information, but noise, for lack of a better way of putting it. Whatever those videos are that we're watching, there's input constantly coming through, and we're sort of fielding and processing that in some way. So it is actually quite tiring for the brain to be processing that, and yet we're hooked on it. So we keep scrolling through. So at the end of it, people often don't feel particularly good, or like they've spent their time particularly well.
That is so interesting, because like sometimes I'm like, I'm bored now. I'm done. Like, I spent 5 minutes on this social media platform, and in the past I would have spent 2 hours, and I'm just like, I've gained nothing out of this. So it's interesting to see what that sort of analysis would be. But anyway, let's not go down a rabbit hole there, because I know I would genuinely poke about it all day, because we have a book to talk about, and the book is The Dopamine Brain. This is the part of the show where I love to kind of get the authors to give me the classic elevator pitch. So with that in mind, I hopped into a lift. You are in here with me. I'm a complete stranger. We are going up to the Dopamine Brain level. What is the Dopamine Brain about?
So this book is aimed at a general audience who are interested in understanding the brain and the body a bit better, and how, on a subconscious level, processes in our brain drive certain behaviors in our day-to-day life. So the dopamine brain is kind of divided into 3 parts. First part is all about the sort of neuroscience of how dopamine actually works, what it is, what it drives us to do. At the end of the first part, I get people to reflect on any changes they might like to make in their life, anything they feel like they're hooked on that they want to sort of step back away from. In the second part of the book, we go into a deep dive exploring values and how these dopamine-driven behaviors don't always align with our values-based behaviors. And then in the third part, we focus a lot on real practical behavioral strategies. So I talk people through actually taking a break from social media, from, smoking cigarettes, whatever it might be that people want to take a break from and potentially either reduce or stop in the long run, and some real practical strategies to help them manage the inevitable urges or cravings that will come about, and how to use values-aligned behaviors to help them sustain those changes.
Ding! We've arrived. Perfect. Nailed it. And thank you for such a fantastic and succinct summary of the actual entirety of the book, because we'll kind of go through it in terms of these 3 particular parts. But I love that this is a book about examining the brain, how it uses dopamine. But what I love is that it transitions into kind of that self-help element that you kind of allude to around around using your brain's functions and how it uses dopamine. You help us to understand dopamine and then how those natural processes, how you can use them to find purpose in your life, which I think is particularly valuable because you're using the tools that are at your disposal. I mean, we talked a little bit about your background just beforehand and origin in psychology, but I'm very curious about the quote-unquote need that was identified when Penguin approached you with this book. Obviously, they kind of said that, dopamine is trending, people are interested in it. How did you kind of come to, I mean, it feels like such a general question, but how did you kind of come to head down the road of crafting a book about dopamine, but dopamine specifically?
Yeah, I didn't think a book about one sort of neurotransmitter in the brain would be like a sought after book, but apparently people are interested in this. I guess part of the writing and the direction was trying to dispel myths that exist online about dopamine and what it is and what it does and how we can manage it. So I mentioned before dopamine detoxes was one of them. So I've got an actual chapter in the book that's all about busting myths relating to dopamine, busting the myth that these 24-hour dopamine detoxes that people were sort of selling are maybe not kind of giving you what you think they will. They're sold as, remove any pleasure in your life for 24 hours. Don't listen to music. Don't talk to friends. Don't eat tasty food. Sit in a dark room. It's this idea that you can kind of have an experience of detoxing from dopamine or from anything that activates dopamine, which is just not true. Dopamine will always be activated in our brain, and it does a lot of things beyond just creating the feeling of pleasure and drive for pleasure. I also came across this kind of parenting trend that was like anti-dopamine parenting. So sort of parents really getting on board with not giving their children things that activate dopamine pathways and stuff. So I guess these sort of I think often these quite extreme approaches to change are driven by people wanting a bit of a quick fix or a clear solution, which is totally understandable. But they don't, the brain and the body and the mind, they're so complex. We don't necessarily have clear, quick fixes for these kinds of things. And so it's just about dispelling some of those myths. So I guess the book was, to answer your question, the book was really guided about trying to educate people in a science backed way, but easy to understand way as well, what happens in the brain, how dopamine drives our behaviors, and what we can do if we want to make some changes.
Absolutely. And as you kind of allude to, you divide that response to that into three parts. I feel like it's such a basic question, but I mean, you talk about first how dopamine works and how it affects our daily lives. And, I think it's good to actually say as a kind of a background for people who might be listening to this podcast who haven't read this book. What exactly is dopamine and how do humans build habits with it?
Yes. Yeah, good question. The question I get asked most often as well, which is a good start.
I'm sorry. I slave to the formula. I'm sorry.
That's good. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which is essentially a chemical messenger between the brain and our central nervous system. And dopamine does lots of different things. It's responsible for lots of different things in our brain and our body. So, for example, it is responsible and helps with the storage of memories. Dopamine also helps regulate our movement. So for people who have Parkinson's, for example, they have implicated dopamine activation, hence why they have less control over their movements. So dopamine even regulates our kidney function to a degree. So it does lots of different things, hence why we can't detox from it completely or completely control its activation. But the thing that it's most known for and talked about for is that dopamine is activated when we experience pleasure. And when I say pleasure, I'm talking about that real short-term instant gratification, but it's also activated in the pursuit of pleasure. So I give an example in the book of, eating a donut. When I bite into a donut, it's super tasty, dopamine's firing in my brain, tastes good, hooray. But when I'm sitting in my office and it's 3:00 and I go, ooh, I feel like a snack, maybe I could go downstairs and get one of those donuts. Dopamine is already firing in my brain, and it's what actually motivates me and drives me to get up out of my chair, go downstairs, buy the donut and bite into it and eat it.
A fantastic answer. I love it. And yes, clearly you're very well versed in in kind of really breaking it down. But you also provide a great transition here into, you know, because given your background in addiction, and kind of examining that, dopamine is a very critical kind of part of that process because it can feed a lot of those addictive issues that kind of can go on in your brain. Like, addiction can kind of come from the release of dopamine or the anticipation of a particular hit of alcohol or drugs, or a desire for pornography or any other particular habits. Obviously there's more to it than that. Kind of what is going on in the brain when it comes to the actual element of unhealthy habits or habits that sure, they provide you that instant gratification, but it's not necessarily good for long-term health or long-term self-care and self-kindness.
Yeah. Because dopamine is activated in the pursuit of something that feels pleasurable or is pleasurable to eat, drink, or experience. It's what drives us to seek that thing out over and over again. So this is what we might kind of experience as some sort of urge or a craving, when it's 9 o'clock at night and you've had dinner and you're sitting on the couch and watching TV and you're like, some chocolate or some chips. That's dopamine being activated. That's that kind of craving we get. It's through this process that we seek out the thing that might not be good for us, that glass of wine, the packet of chips, whatever it might be, the thing that we know is not so good for us rationally, but on a subconscious level, our brain is driving us towards. Now, the reason this happens is from an evolutionary perspective. Dopamine actually helped us survive. So finding food was not easy. We had to hunt and gather and, kill animals and eat them and all these sorts of things. But it was hard work to survive. So when we ate, we'd get dopamine activated to motivate us to eat and then to also kind of repeat that process. The same goes for sex and survival of the species. Dopamine is activated during sex because we need people to procreate for survival of the species. So dopamine had a very important evolutionary function back in the days when life was much harder. Nowadays, I don't need to hunt and gather. I can get Uber Eats and I can get dopamine activated and those kind of the resources that I need to survive. I can get those so easily. And even further than that, tech these days knows how to activate dopamine pathways in the brain. And so we exist now in a society where we have indulgence at our fingertips, but our brain, because dopamine is so primal, it's still acting in a really primal way, going, eat the food, get the food, this is for survival. Whereas the rational brain is going, we're okay without that extra packet of chips.
And then that can lead to overindulgence and kind of seeking that enjoyment feel to it, which is where I think this book transitions really, really nicely into talking about this thing that I was very kind of the way you described it, identifying values or identifying, to trying to help improve your relationship with dopamine. And identifying values is a way that I think it was kind of almost a little bit of a left turn pivot because, talk to me about why identifying values is so important when it comes to helping improve your relationship with dopamine. Because, when people would see this book initially, they would kind of think, okay, it's a deep dive into the science, it's a deep dive into the actual functions of dopamine. But when you kind of transition into, I kind of view like the second part of the book is kind of very much, I don't want to say like it's such a pigeonhole word to describe it, but like diving towards more self-help, but it's more just like you've kind of set the standard for this is how this functions. This is what it does to ensure human survival and how it exists. But then in today's society, this is how it's sort of it can be misused or corrupted somewhat because we don't live in a world where it's kill or be killed.
I think it's really important for us to focus on values. And if I can explain why, I'm going to use an example of spending too much time on social media, right? This approach applies to people who are hooked on something, whether that be hooked in a sort of mild way or severely addicted to something. If we try and change any behavior, right? Whether it's I spend too much time on social media, I'm drinking too much alcohol, I'm playing too many video games, whatever it is. If we want to try and change that behavior, ultimately we're trying to reduce it in some way. So I could go, you know what? I'm going to delete Instagram off my phone for 2 weeks, or I'm going to not game for a month, or whatever it might be. So we set ourselves this target to reduce. Now, this is a very sort of typical way whenever we try and change a behavior and we want to do less of it, we kind of put the blocks in place. The problem with this is that if we only do this, that will typically last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, however long it is. But if we don't change anything else in our life, eventually we will just go back to doing what we were doing initially. So when I eventually re-download Instagram on my phone, I will probably very quickly go back to the pattern that I was engaged in before. So we have a period of things being better, but it doesn't last. So the reason I go into values is because I take a two-prong approach to making change. Yes, we need to do things to reduce or stop how much we're using the device or whatever it might be. But at the same time, when we have that 2 weeks off Instagram, we need to build other things. And those things are values-aligned behaviors. If we're living our life in alignment with our values, the research tells us that overall we are more kind of satisfied in our overall life. We have a greater feeling of contentment. And so this is really protective for us to prevent us from going back to the harmful or addictive sort of patterns that we were in before. If I feel overall pretty content in my life, if I'm doing lots of things that align with my values that feel meaningful for me, sure, I'm still going to scroll Instagram, but I've got a better buffer there to prevent me from going back to the same kind of addictive pattern that I was in before. So it's important to take that two-prong approach to reducing the behavior, but increasing values-aligned behaviors.
That's a great answer to that question, and it transitions quite nicely into kind of the last part of the book, which is ones about techniques and things that you can use in there. And I mean, the first thing I really did was do comparisons of my own. I myself recently had, always am chatting with my psychologist. Recently, have kind of finished going through my treatment with that psychologist, and I found myself actually kind of finding a lot of similarities there. There's a lot of mindfulness exercises that I now do in my day-to-day. Writing, making time to actually do writing that I want to do, physical exercise, reducing the amount of coffee that I consume, self-care time, which is a big one for me, not separating actual enjoyment and a chance to relax from overworking, because I do this hustle outside of my full-time job, and identifying when it's time for me to actually be creative and when it's time for me to actually rest. Even my own relationship, for example, with social media, I didn't go completely cold turkey, for example. My big one is YouTube. I'm very bad with YouTube. And then kind of instead I would do something like put a timer on. So I'd say, look, I'm not going to go completely cold turkey, but, I'm going to allow myself, I'll have YouTube on in the background playing music while I'm working or something like that. Or, I'll have listen to a podcast on YouTube while I'm walking the dog. And then if it gets to my 2 hours of the day, then that is whatever it is. That's more than enough. But the big one for me, which kind of helped me to differentiate with this book a little bit, was that if I was having a terrible day, the value of self-kindness is something that I'd kind of had picked up on. If I'm, for example, I don't play video games very often, but when I do, I like to really get into it and really enjoy it. And there is nothing wrong with doing that. There is nothing wrong if, for example, you shouldn't feel guilty about if I'm having a terrible day and I want to listen to a couple more podcasts, I can take that time off if I need to. Mm-hmm. But I don't do it every time. It's more of a recognizing how I am feeling at that time and kind of going with it. Talk to me a little bit. That's just my own experience. First of all, give me kind of a summary of how I've done in terms of techniques, in terms of my relationship with dopamine. Am I bad? Am I good? Off the back of that.
You've done great, because the key thing you just identified there is choice. And there's a difference between feeling like we're hooked and driven to do something, so to listen to, YouTube for 5 hours a day, versus choosing that on this particular day, I don't feel so great, and actually I'm going to give myself another hour from what I'd allocated. Because being hooked on something or having that addictive tendency, that's where kind of choice feels like it's taken away from us. But if we are choosing quite consciously with some degree of control to engage with something, that's great.
That's awesome. Yay, I'm on the right path. But but obviously, of course, this is just my example, but there's other ones in the book as well. Talk to me about the techniques that you kind of talk through, like to help transition and behave, help maintain, or identify those behavioral challenges that kind of come with improving your relationship with dopamine. But also, I also kind of want to ask, what exactly do these techniques do, and what does it do to your brain over time in terms?
Yeah. So I give people a set of techniques in the book to help them manage urges and cravings. And so if we think about urges and cravings as being really sort of driven by what's happening in the brain and our neurochemistry, very much kind of outside of rational, conscious thought and awareness, when we feel like we have these overwhelming internal experiences, it's often helpful to match these with sensory experiences, because to talk ourselves through it can sort of be like trying to take a rational approach to something that's not rational in nature. So my go-to strategy for anyone who's ever feeling overwhelmed with an urge, a craving, an emotion, distress, whatever it is utilize cold. If you are having that urge to be like, oh, I've gone, 10 days without a drink of alcohol and now I really want to go back to it, before you make that decision, I encourage you to jump in a cold shower. Jump in a swimming pool, get some bags of frozen peas out of the freezer and put them on your face, get an ice pack, put it over your face, hold some ice cubes in your hand. The cold is so effective for regulating us on a very physiological level. We try to replicate what we refer to as the deep dive reflex or the mammalian dive reflex. So if you were to jump into a swimming pool of water, you'd hold your breath, but the cold would also change your heart rate, your blood pressure, just physiologically how your body is working. And that's really helpful to help us bring down distress or urges or cravings. So this is something incredibly useful for people who are going through either quite serious addiction recovery or wanting to make changes but feeling that pull back to it. Other sensory things, anything that's a bit of a sensory shock to the system, eating something chili or some wasabi, or biting into a lemon that's really sour, right? Anything that kind of is a bit of a shock to the system on a sensory level really helps us manage urges and cravings. Now, these are great for in the moment, but again, like they'll help us manage moment to moment, but we need that kind of second layer of those values-based actions to help make those changes sustainable.
So it's kind of a two-pronged line of defense, so to speak. It's kind of like to stop addiction. There's the day-to-day general sort of stuff and techniques and things, but there has to actually be something concrete behind it if you are to instill positive change and positive habits in yourself over time.
Yes, absolutely. Because if we are used to getting dopamine activated through screens, through video games, whatever it might be, if we stop that, our brain is sort of going into this dopamine deficit state where it's craving it and looking for it again. And so it's going to feel very uncomfortable. I sort of tell people, expect that you will have some urges that come up for it, because your brain is now functioning in a different way to what it was when you had dopamine activated through that behavior.
Absolutely. So, as kind of an endpoint to this discussion about the book, I mean, you're an educator, you're a researcher, you like to learn. Like that's kind of the environment that you've in the profession that you've found yourself in. Out of curiosity, what did writing The Dopamine Brain teach Dr. Anastasia?
Ooh, the biggest thing it taught me is how to communicate science. That was in some ways the thing that took me the longest to settle into, was the writing style. I'm used to writing academic research and academic papers, which is full of jargon and, very to the point with not really many stories and analogies and things. And so it was actually learning how to communicate science in a way that's going to be interesting to a general audience to want to read, for people who have a bit of an appetite for this but don't want to read, scientific papers, how to communicate to them. That was the big learning for me.
That's a great answer to that question, because I think it definitely comes through in the the kind of very approachable style is quite helpful for this book, because it means you give people the opportunity to understand, which I think is one of the most valuable parts of it, and kind of helps break it down into great ways. Out of curiosity, do you think, obviously, of course, you have your full-time job and your full-time role, but would it be something you'd ever want to revisit again? Would there be another book in there?
I think there could be. I think there could be. It's an area I'm very interested in, not just dopamine itself, but kind of what drives our behaviors, and to give people the grace of understanding there's stuff happening beneath conscious awareness that actually drives us in certain directions. And if we understand that better, we understand ourselves better. But there potentially could be a second book. We'll see.
Well, if there is, I'm definitely going to be jumping on it, because it definitely is a subject that when it comes to self-improvement and self-help and self-kindness, I think it's a great, actually understanding what is going on up here physically is something that is, I think, incredibly invaluable for, just how humans function in general and everything in between. So I think it's a great book. It's really, really helpful and really, really informative.
Thank you.
We'll finish off the podcast. I like to always finish off with kind of a rapid fire part of the show, where I basically give you a bunch of questions and I basically fling them at you, and you have to give me the first answer that comes to your head. So at the risk of setting off any sort of other sort of neurotransmitters that might bring out fear or terror, we're now going to dive into it. Are you ready?
Okay, I think I'm ready. As ready as I can.
Ha! Let's go. First, what is your like, obviously, because we are a book podcast, we like to talk about book habits and reading habits. What's your favorite book that you've read in the last 12 months?
Oh, it's called Smartphone Nation.
Oh, you've got it with you. Oh, awesome.
It's not my book, but Smartphone Nation. So it's actually about being addicted to screens. But I quite like this book. It's written by a UK I think she's a neuroscientist, but she talks also a lot about online safety, which is, I'm very interested in kind of the online world, but I haven't done much in sort of online safety, which she really goes into. And I found some of her insights fascinating.
That's a great answer. I might have to pick that one up, just because being a person with a career in online spaces, it's always handy to know what other small little things you can learn and what you can do to be a little bit more online savvy. Absolutely. What is your favorite debut novel that you've ever read?
This is a good one. I was going to say I've got a friend and colleague who wrote a book called When Nothing Feels Real, and so it's about his kind of story of derealization and depersonalization and kind of anxious sort of symptoms and presentations. And it just came out recently. I read it about a month or two ago, and it's been fascinating.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Like deep dive into stopping. I mean, is it like not over, like trying to kind of get out of your own heads, metaphorically, so to speak? Is that kind of what it's about?
It's about experiences where you feel like you're kind of living in the world, but the world isn't real. Like that sense of like I know I'm living life. I know I'm in a version of reality, but I almost don't even feel real myself, or I don't feel like the world is real.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh God. Sounds very true. Sounds very Truman Show-esque, like that like weird experience that people are having. Do you have a favorite word?
Word.
Could be a scientific word. There's an opportunity here. If there's a particular like word or phrase or scientific thing that like that comes up in your work, I'm actually quite curious to hear if there's one that you just personally just enjoy.
Oh, yeah, you know what? Sure, I have an answer to that. It's not an interesting word, but the word is harm. So I'm always talking about to people in the context of the work that I do, think less through the lens of addiction and think more through a lens of harms, because there's a small percentage of the population that will experience severe clinical addictions, but a great portion of the population will experience harm as a result of certain addictive substances and behaviors. So that's my word.
Fantastic. That's a great answer. A good way to kind of re-examine and examine like how people would view the word harm in a different way. But that's fascinating through like a professional lens. Obviously, we talked a little bit about techniques at the end of talking about the dopamine brain. Do you have a favorite technique that you like to do personally in your day-to-day that you put in the book?
Yeah. My favorite technique that I that I tell myself all the time, and I think is sort of a good way to like delay anxiety or stress, or at least for me, is I go, oh, that's future Anastasia's problem. You know, if something comes my way that doesn't need to be dealt, okay, that's tomorrow Anastasia's problem. That's future Anastasia's problem to deal with. And it's great because then I don't need to take on the stress of it right now. I can compartmentalize it to, okay, me next week will deal with that.
Smart. And does future Anastasia deal with it frequently, or is it also just like
future Anastasia goes,
I love it. So this is a bit of a loaded question, but it's mostly also driven by like stuff that makes me laugh. Often whenever I go, you examine the discourse of how the publishing world works, and you see interpretations of it in film or television or other sorts of mediums. Sometimes they get stuff really wrong, which I find hilarious. Like so many assumptions or kind of about, oh yeah, publishing it, you make loads and loads of money, which makes me laugh so much. And I know that psychology is infinitely complex and can often be misinterpreted by many, many people. Is there a psychology myth or something in the world, like a misinterpret or misrepresentation that, I mean, obviously there would be ones that would make you go, no, that leads to bad assumptions, don't do that. But is there one that you kind of find in a weird way entertaining, even if it is incorrect?
I mean, I wouldn't say that they're incorrect, but the one I find entertaining at the moment is the like getting on the flights and, what they call like raw dogging the flights and not like watching any like TV, not listening to any music on the flight. And you're on a flight for like 15 hours and you just sit there and look at a blank screen in front of you. I find that quite amusing because like I think people like are doing it as a bit of a flex. And if that's the case, like go you, but is it actually going to like change anything for you? No, it's just going to give you the satisfaction of knowing you sat on a plane for 15 hours and didn't watch any TV. Like, I think that one kind of makes me laugh a little bit. Like it's the same as like the dopamine detox. You're not changing anything. You're just sitting in a very uncomfortable state for like 15 hours. So if that's how you'd like to spend your time, then do that. But I'm not sure it kind of has the, evidence for change behind it that people might think it does.
Is it a feeling of being bored almost? It's like, I want to prove that I can get through this uncomfortable situation. There's nothing in my head. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with watching a movie or
and also it's like, is anyone doing it and like not sharing with everyone that they did it as well? Like, how much of this is kind of like a flex to be like, I did this I sat for the whole flight and I didn't do anything, and like, snap a picture of it and put it online? Because I think it's again this kind of like communication of like, I can do hard things, which it is a hard thing, but I don't know it's a hard thing that we need to do. Life's hard enough.
Yeah, that's right. Life is hard enough, and like finding some joy when sometimes it's not bad to have to do that, to actually find some joy, because you get in a lift and your absolute hero is there, or like celebrity best friend. Who is it?
Celebrity best friend.
Could be a hero as well. Whoever.
So I've got a background in music. I played piano for many years of my life, and it would absolutely be either like famous composers like Beethoven or Chopin, or like concert pianists that I just look up to. My number one is a guy, Evgeny Kissin, so it would be them in the lift.
That's cool. Like classic. Like, what would you do? Now I'm curious. Now I want to ask. Like, you've got a time to ask one question. What would you ask, or would you just give him a hug?
I just fangirl. I just be like, I love you. You're amazing. That's it.
Proof even like professional psychologists can still fangirl. We're all human at the end of the day. And then last question. I always like to ask this at the end of my rapid fire questions, and it feels particularly potent given we're talking about a book about dopamine. But are you happy?
Yes. I am. I feel very fulfilled in my life. I feel very grateful for so many wonderful people, wonderful opportunities that I have. So, yes.
Good. I'm happy. I got my dopamine hit today because I got to talk to you. Three guesses what my dopamine hits are, because I got to talk about the Dopamine Brain, which for everyone listening, it's published by Penguin Random House. It's out in the world right now. You don't even have to wait for this one. It's out in the world. You can go and get a copy of it. It's written by Dr Anastasia Hronis. It's published by Penguin Random House. Make sure you can get a copy in the description. You can go and buy it there. If you can't do that, it'd probably be in a local library. Head to your local library as well. Hire it out. Check it out. Get a read. No matter what it is, you can get it somewhere. And I've had a great time talking with Dr. Anastasia today. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on Date with a Debut.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Date with a Debut, and for listening to the Words and Nerds channel. You can buy all books mentioned in today's episode down in the description box, and if you enjoyed the show, drop us a review, leave us 5 stars or a thumbs up. It really helps the show out. If you want to hear episodes when they drop, be sure to subscribe to Words and Nerds, or you can subscribe to Date with a Debut on Podbean to hear the latest episodes as they drop. Want to support the show more? You can also subscribe to my Patreon in the description to get early access to episodes, book reviews, recommendations, and a whole lot more. Catch you soon! Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production.